It is Thursday, June 24th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, we're almost to the end of June. I've got my baseball hat on tonight because I'm about to coach the last game of the season for my son's team. I just figured it was like, I don't know, kind of a mini tribute, kind of the end of something on the same day that my kids finish school for the year, actually.
I bet you're excited about that second part.
It's nice to have some extra help around the house to do the opposite of help as I'm getting into a busy work season. I'm getting baseball games out of the way. It's been fun, but it's at least one less thing that I have to worry about. So maybe it'll allow me to actually finish up the IDP projections that people keep asking me for. But I'm getting there in case you're one of those folks that's wondering.
Little extra time to get out on the golf course.
Yeah, right. I'm looking for things that are fun, actually. This is episode 2 of our 8-part division preview series. We hit the NFC West last week. You can find that on draftsharks.com, on YouTube, on Facebook, wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we head to the AFC West, where the Chiefs obviously currently dominate. A couple other teams might be on the rise, though. Jared, you did the profiles for this division. Any kind of overall summary or any teasers you want to throw out before we dig in?
Well, I was going to say, I think we might be looking at 2 of the top 5 offenses in the NFL in this division, by the end of the year. So we got plenty of firepower to talk about today.
Yeah, and we'll see exactly which other offense besides Kansas City that Jared's referring to. But we're going to start with the Denver Broncos, and we always start with relevant coaching changes, even when there are none, as there aren't in Denver this year. No big changes. Vic Fangio heads into his 3rd season as Denver's head coach. Ed Donatel remains the defensive coordinator for you IDP folks. Pat Shurmur hits year 2 as the offensive coordinator. Nearly identical run-pass split last year with Shurmur as the OC versus the previous season without him. 57-43 pass run. Despite Denver dipping from 7-9 to 5-11 last season, I just stuck with that for projecting the Broncos this season. The situation neutral play rate, at least, jumped from 2019 to 2020. They ranked 21st in 2019, 10th last year with Shurmur around, ran nearly 80 more total offensive plays last season.
Yeah, so that was my first note here is that Denver ranked, as you said, 10th in situation neutral pace, 5th in overall pace, just 18th in total plays. So, they wanted to be a fast offense. They just kind of didn't get there, probably because, they just weren't effective enough. So I do think there's upside for more plays here this season. As you mentioned, it was, a run-leaning offense. Denver was 26th in situation neutral pass rate. So even when the scoreboard didn't dictate it, they were leaning heavily towards the run. I took them up to 58% pass this year just because I expect them to get better quarterback play, which I guess we can get into here.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they even get to 60 plus because I'm not sure that the team is going to be very good. They do have a lot of receivers, but as you alluded to, one of the big issues last year and probably the biggest issue was lack of efficiency at quarterback. And that's probably why they brought in competition for Drew Lock this year. From a fantasy standpoint, there's a lot of talk about who's going to start at quarterback for Denver. I don't believe that it really matters all that much unless Drew Lock takes a big leap in his play this year. And I say that because we know what Teddy Bridgewater is at this point. He's accurate. He's throwing short range. He's done that now for 3 different teams. I don't think there's any reason to expect that to change. Drew Lock is just like one guy trying to control a fire hose. It's going to spray all over the place, but when he gets it pointed in the right direction, it can at least be efficient from a fantasy standpoint where he'll get yards and maybe some scoring opportunities.
Yeah, so to me, between these 2 guys, there's no argument that Teddy Bridgewater has been better as a pro so far. Drew Lock is entering his 3rd season. So the argument for him is that, he's still yet to take a step forward. To me, he was just so disappointing last year, and he was always like a, boom bust prospect to begin with. And I'm just leaning towards that he is a bust. We'll see what happens in training camp, what happens in preseason action. I kind of expect Bridgewater to win this job. And, I do think whoever's under center, and I'm not drafting either of these guys right now because I don't know who it's going to be. And, they both might end up making starts this season. But I do think whoever wins the job, could be someone we're looking at as a spot starter during the season because of the pass catching weapons and because both guys can run the ball a bit. They've both averaged right around 15 rushing yards per game for their careers, which, is something when you're looking, down the list for a spot starter.
Yeah, for me, either one could be a spot starter just because every quarterback who starts can be a spot starter at some point. But I don't think we're mining a whole lot of value here. Again, I think the biggest upside in the Denver QB spot would be if Drew Lock just shows that he's ready to take this big leap versus last year. I think that's the shot that Denver has. But like you, I'm leaning toward just thinking that Drew Lock is not that good.
Yep, agreed.
Running back notes, Broncos actually dropped from 22% target share for running backs in 2019 to just under 13% last year. 9th highest in that category in 2019, down to 5th lowest with Pat Shurmur around. If you look back over Pat Shurmur's history, there's really no clear trend either way. It's not like he's been terrible for running back targets. He also hasn't been awesome in other spots. You know, you can find spots where it was high, spots where it was low. So I don't think that there's necessarily a trend to read here. But that's, I think, an aspect worth paying attention to and considering while we project these running backs.
Probably wise for them to not target running backs that much last year because Phillip Lindsay has never been good in the passing game. And Melvin Gordon was really bad from an efficiency standpoint in the passing game last year. He finished dead last in both yards per target and yards per route run among 41 running backs with at least 30 targets last season. He was 39th among those 41 guys in PFF receiving grade. So, you know, we'll talk about Javonte Williams here, but there is probably an opportunity for the rookie to get some passing game work right out of the gate if Gordon isn't any better this season.
Yeah, and Melvin Gordon is an interesting case. He didn't help himself at all, I'm sure, by skipping voluntary spring workouts, did return for the mandatory stuff. We also don't know whether he hurt himself by being away. It is optional. I haven't seen anything where Denver coaches are blasting Melvin Gordon for not showing up or fretting over him not being there. And Melvin Gordon's still around. He carries a nearly $9 million cap hit. We know that the Broncos liked him when they signed him. He is still around, so we certainly can't necessarily push him to the number 2 spot in a backfield that could just be mixed this year.
Yeah, so, I mean, Gordon wasn't good in the passing game last year. He was still effective on the ground, though. He averaged 4.6 yards per carry. That was the second best mark of his career. He was 10th among 47 qualifying running backs in both elusive rating and PFF rushing grade. So he was still effective last season. Broncos obviously let Phillip Lindsay go, but they did make that trade up to take Javonte Williams in the early second round. So, they're obviously high on him. I think the rookie's going to have a role right away. Just, how big of a role is the question.
Yeah, Williams looks good. He drew some Nick Chubb comparisons as a prospect. I think that oversells him a little bit. I don't think he's Nick Chubb 2.0, but you can certainly find plenty of measurables that speak to Javonte Williams being a good runner. And the fact that they moved up in round 2 to get him is obviously a big mark in his favor in terms of his role. I think it's also worth looking back, though, at last year's round 2 running backs. And we're generally excited about those players right now. But, I mean, DeAndre Swift did not even lead Detroit in carries last year. Jonathan Taylor delivered, but it took a little while, and he was also helped by Marlon Mack going down in week 1. Cam Akers was delayed, mostly injury. We don't really know what a full season of a healthy Cam Akers would have looked like. J.K. Dobbins finished with 10 fewer carries than Gus Edwards for the season. A.J. Dillon was a non-factor. So round 2 is definitely early. They moved up. It was early round 2 where they took Javonte Williams, but I want to make sure I don't overrate where he went, just looking at recent history.
And so I looked at running backs picked in the first half of round 2, where Williams was picked over the previous 10 drafts. There were 10 of those running backs in that range. Only 3 of those 10 topped 190 carries as rookies. The median among that group was 174 carries. I think that's a fair range for Williams. Unless Gordon gets released, which I'm not expecting. I haven't heard any reliable source say that that's really even a thought right now. This is going to be a committee backfield. Both of these guys are going to remain involved. It's probably going to be a frustrating situation to try to, guess at during the season if you're, setting weekly lineups.
Yes, that's what I'm expecting. And to that end, here's a fairly lengthy quote from Vic Fangio to ESPN recently. He said, "Well, I think there's enough work to be had for everybody if everybody proves they're worthy. I think you have to throw Mike Boone in that when you talk about that position too. We'll carve out a role for them. Obviously, Melvin is an established back in this league, played good for us last year, and we like him. We obviously like Williams, and we like Boone. So you never have enough backs, and I'm confident that there will be enough work for all of them." So I agree. I think it's going to be a muddle. I think it's going to be a committee. I think it's worth noting he didn't mention Royce Freeman in that quote. So maybe Royce Freeman is the kind of guy who is freed up to go to a team like Atlanta later on. But for now, there are 3 backs in a Denver backfield that's really not exciting on whole. So for me, I'm just not all that excited about a Denver running back this year.
Yeah, me either. And the O-line is a concern here too. They were 28th last year in both PFF run blocking grades and Football Outsiders adjusted line yards. The unit looks pretty similar. There's no, major upgrades made. So I think it's going to be a below average run blocking line again this season.
Pass catcher notes, Courtland Sutton's coming off a week 1 ACL tear from last season, robbed us of the chance of seeing him with Jerry Jeudy basically at all last year. 2 promising seasons for Sutton so far as an early round 2 pick. Of course, Denver took Jeudy 15th overall last season, then took KJ Hamler in round 2. Sutton cracked the top 20 fantasy wideouts in 2019, but ranked 15th at the position in targets even that season. Nearly doubled his nearest teammate that year in targets as well. 124 versus Noah Fant was number 2 at 66. So, there's a lot of guessing going on as we project this Denver wide receiver core this season.
Yeah, it's one of the more interesting pass catching groups in the league to me, because I think the talent, this could be, when you look at Sutton, Jeudy, and then Noah Fant, I think that trio, the 2 wide receivers and tight end, it could be a top 5 unit talent-wise. But, then you got to figure out how the target's going to be divvied, and then you got to figure out the quarterback play. And that's why I'm hoping it's Bridgewater, because I just think he's the type of guy that is just accurate enough to get all these guys the football and let them do their thing. But, yeah, Sutton, like you said, he was a prospect we all liked coming out of SMU, had the promising rookie season, broke out in 2019 with over 1,100 yards on 72 catches. He was good that season in yards per route run. He was 12th among 79 qualifying wide receivers that year, 13th in PFF receiving grade. So, he looked like a guy on the ascent, maybe even, ready to have an even better season last year before the ACL. He tore his ACL and his MCL last year. So, multi-ligament injury. He was back to running by February, running pass routes by March. He said his game plan is to be ready for the start of training camp. The injury did happen in mid-September, so the timeline kind of works where expecting him to be ready for week 1. But, these guys coming off ACLs, I think there's always a risk of at least them getting off to, slower starts.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be worth watching through the summer to see what the reports say, to see if he's taking days off, if there are any kind of compensatory issues or whatever. We'll keep an eye on Courtland Sutton throughout practice. Jerry Jeudy, another guy that we all liked as a prospect, probably even more than Sutton on a relative scale, wasn't very good as a rookie by any measure. And so the question is, why? Was it just, a rookie struggling in the league? Was it a multitude of factors? If we want to blame the quarterback play primarily, I have to wonder if they really got better, and especially as it pertains to what Jerry Jeudy does well, or at least the role in which they tried to use him last year. Teddy Bridgewater would certainly improve the accuracy, but he would also shorten the ADOT. So Jeudy was a downfield guy last year. Maybe could he be like this year's Robbie Anderson, where he's a downfield guy going to this team with Teddy Bridgewater. Now all of a sudden he's a short range guy. They target him a lot more often. He's efficient from a catch standpoint, not piling up the yards so much. Or is that Courtland Sutton with this team, or is neither guy fitting that kind of role? Last year it was Jeudy had a 14.6 ADOT. Courtland Sutton's also been more of a downfield guy. So, it's just another question with this team, not knowing exactly what the plan's going to be and how the quarterback competition might affect the way that these guys are deployed.
Yeah, and not to keep going back to Bridgewater, but he did produce 3 top 30 fantasy wide receivers in Carolina last year. So, regardless of how he's doing it, if it's short stuff, he did get that production from those guys. And I think Sutton and Jeudy are at least as good as DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Yeah, so Judy's usage last year was all you could have asked for. The targets, the air, he was like top 5 in the NFL in air yards, but his final stat line was disappointing. Part of it, like you said, was quarterback play. He had the second lowest catchable target rate among 84 qualifying wide receivers. Then he also had all those drops, 12 drops according to PFF, an 18.8% drop rate. That was the second worst mark in the NFL. I'm just not worried about that. His hands were an issue coming out of Alabama. Our buddy Hayden Winks just posted an article today, kind of looking at what matters for projecting wide receiver performance, and he actually found a negative correlation between drops and fantasy points. Basically, dropping the ball means you're getting opportunities, you're getting targets, which is what we want. So I'm not worried about the drops at all. You just got to hope Jeudy gets better quarterback play this season. I still think he's what was an awesome looking prospect is a guy who's going to be a success in the NFL. So he's someone that I just want to bet on in general.
This might be pushing it a little too far, but I'm not sure that it's accurate to say that Jeudy and Sutton are at least as good as DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. I think DJ Moore is the best player among those 4. We'll see what Jeudy turns into. Robbie Anderson and Courtland Sutton look fairly similar to me.
Yeah, I'd lean Sutton there. And then, I think Judy can be as good as DJ Moore. But yeah, the Moore Anderson combo is definitely more proven so far. I'll give you that.
Mm. So for me, it's tough to separate here. I don't know whether Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy is going to outperform the other, and maybe that gets revealed somewhat in the summer by how they're talked about and how healthy Sutton is. So the way that I'm trying to separate here is, who am I really going to regret not buying if I'm not in on them? And for me right now, based on their price, I don't think either Sutton or Jeudy fits that category for me. I'm not scared of missing out on something special in 2021 with either player by not drafting them that much.
So Sutton at wide receiver 31, Jeudy at wide receiver 35. That's the FFPC data we have. That's close to where we have both those guys ranked. And maybe as we get into more lineup setting stuff and like individual leagues, I won't be targeting them so heavily. But I'm doing all these underdog best balls right now, where I'm going to be building a portfolio of 30, 40 teams, and they're definitely guys I'm getting pieces of. Jeudy especially, I've drafted a lot, probably too much of Jerry Jeudy. I don't know my exposure percentage, but it might be like over 50% right now. Again, they're just two talents I believe in, and they're going in wide receiver 3 range. So I don't think it's a huge cost. I think both of them have the potential to finish top 20 this season.
Well, we'll get to Jerry Jeudy a bit more in a minute. I think a big part of why I'm not all that interested in targeting the two wideouts is that Noah Fant, to me, looks better from a value standpoint among them. He edged Mark Andrews for 5th in my personal PPR projections among tight ends. So that's above where he's going ADP wise. And I think if it is Teddy Bridgewater, he could be even better for Noah Fant's outlook than he would be for any of the wideouts on this team.
Yeah, I could see that as kind of the short range stuff. Carolina didn't have a tight end do much last season, but I think that's more Joe Brady's system than anything to do with Teddy Bridgewater. Fant, again, like Sutton and Jeudy, just a talent I want to bet on. He was an excellent looking prospect coming out of Iowa, had a strong rookie season. His season last year too. So Fant last year finished PPR 12 tight end 12 in PPR points per game, 18th in non-PPR. But he had a funky season. There was that one game where the Broncos were missing all their quarterbacks against the Saints. So you throw that out. Fant left week 4 about halfway through with an ankle injury. Then he played just 5 snaps in week 14 due to an illness. So he basically only played 12 real games last season. And if you just look at those games, he was 5th among tight ends in PPR points per game, 10th in non-PPR. So Fant's going tight end 8 right now in FFPC. I think that's a fair spot, and it's definitely a spot that he is capable of beating.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you can see more in Jared's Noah Fant hype video if you go to the Draft Sharks Twitter feed or the YouTube page. I've barely mentioned KJ Hamler and had not mentioned Tim Patrick yet. It's basically because I don't care about them at all in fantasy this year. I don't see any reason to bet on a 3rd or 4th Denver receiver in this system.
Nope. And Patrick was pretty good if you look at some of the efficiency stuff last year, and Hamler is, I think still an intriguing prospect, but they're going to need an injury to, Sutton or Jeudy to have a chance at fantasy value this season.
Yeah. Who I like here the most is Noah Fant, tight end 8 in FFPC best ball ADP on draftsharks.com right now. It's not a must draft spot, but I think it's certainly a fine value for him. And I do think that he has upside from that spot. As I mentioned, I have him 5th in my early PPR projections, at least. And at the least, I think he's a reason that you can wait beyond the other tight ends going just ahead of him, more than necessarily needing to reach over ADP to get to him.
Yeah, again, with Fant, Sutton, and Jeudy, they're not like screaming values if you look at ADP versus where they sit in the rankings. But there are 3 guys I just want to get pieces of, because I do think the upside, if one of them just kind of emerges as like the clear lead guy and gets a target share higher than what we're expecting, I think the upside is big on all 3 of them.
Jerry Jeudy, can tell me whether his ADP is different on Underdog, because I don't know it offhand. He's inside wide receiver 3 range on FFPC drafting. Even if he hits there, what is the upside? I think that he has to outperform Cortland Sutton to be a real hit from there. Otherwise, I don't know, a low-end wide receiver 3 on this team doesn't excite me, and I don't know that either player has wide receiver 1 upside. So I don't find any reason to go chasing Jerry Jeudy in that range where I'm reaching for him ahead of somebody like Curtis Samuel.
Yeah, you said wide receiver 30. I don't have his Underdog ADP either. It feels like it might be even a bit later on Underdog. I like him, and I think Jeudy could definitely outproduce Cortland Sutton this season. I like Sutton as a prospect. I think Jeudy was a better looking prospect coming out, and he's not coming off the major knee injury. So I definitely think it's possible that Jeudy leads this team in targets and fantasy points this year.
Mm-hmm. Kansas City Chiefs, anything on the coaching changes front for them, Jared?
Nothing. It's Andy Reid again, 23rd year as an NFL head coach, his 9th with the Chiefs. I think when looking at the Chiefs, you just want to look at the last 3 years when it was Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And man, they've been remarkably consistent as far as pass rate in those 3 seasons. It's gone 61.1% pass, 61.6% pass, and then 61.9% pass. So, I just went 61.5% pass this season. Feel pretty good about that one.
Yeah, I went 62-38. It's probably just when I did the math, that's how the numbers pushed it when I went from fractions to whole numbers, but whatever. Exactly. When it goes that close for 3 straight years, you stick with it and enjoy yourself.
Yep, the Chiefs have also been 6th, and then 7th in situation neutral pace under Reid and Mahomes the past 3 seasons. So it's a team that we can expect to be near the top of the league in total offensive plays.
And it's interesting to note, I think, that they were in that range each of the past 3 years. Before that, his first 5 seasons in Kansas City, Andy Reid, the offense didn't crack 59% in pass. So clearly he has adjusted what the plan is for this otherworldly quarterback that landed in his lap. And let's get to QB notes and talk about that quarterback. You don't have to say a whole lot about Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. I think people are pretty familiar with what he can do. He trailed only Dak Prescott in fantasy points per games last year. If you want to throw in Marcus Mariota's 1 game for the Raiders, then Mariota was also ahead of Mahomes. But for multi-game players, we'll say that it was Dak and then Patrick Mahomes. I'm probably not the Mahomes drafter just because of how early you have to make that move, unless we're talking about going for a Chiefs stack in a best ball tournament. But I think that Mahomes should certainly be the first quarterback off the board.
Yep, no argument here. I think the 2 notes on Mahomes, the turf toe injury he suffered in the playoffs last year. He had surgery on that issue on February 10th. He was a full participant in mini camp though. So that should be a non-issue by the time the season rolls around. And the Chiefs O-line, I mean, obviously if you watch the Super Bowl, you saw what a problem that was. During the season, Mahomes was pressured on 34% of his dropbacks. That was 14th highest in the league. It was 6 percentage points higher than it was in 2019. So, the Chiefs went out and addressed that this offseason. They made a trade for tackle Orlando Brown from Baltimore, who's, been good in PFF pass blocking grades the past couple seasons. They signed guard Joe Tooney to a 5-year, $80 million deal. He was 3rd among 63 qualifying guards in PFF's 2020 pass blocking grades. They signed Kyle Long. They signed Austin Blythe. They drafted Creed Humphrey in round 2. So it should be a much improved O-line. It might be the best O-line that Mahomes has played behind as a pro so far.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see exactly how it turns out because O-line is one of those places where you can't necessarily add all the pieces together and get the sum that you think you're going to get. But they clearly went full renovation on the O-line. They saw that they had issues that they wanted to fix. So, I mean, at this point, we're going to have to trust that Andy Reid knows what he's doing, especially from the O-line, a guy who played offensive line in college and came up coaching that area as well. Running back notes, Jared, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you made your video case for him the other day. What do you have to say about the second-year guy?
Yeah, I did the whole video, and I'm still kind of like wishy-washy on CEH. I think you can make a case for him to be an RB1. I think you can make a case for him to drop closer to like the back end of the top 20. His rookies, there were good things about his rookie season. There were bad things about his rookie season. I mean, the Chiefs clearly tried to make him like a workhorse back early on. Edwards-Helaire averaged 17.8 carries and 5.2 targets over his first 6 games. That sunk to 9.9 carries and 3.1 targets over the final 9. There were some injuries in there, but they clearly scaled him back. Obviously, adding Le'Veon Bell, they got Darrell Williams more in the mix. His work near the goal line kind of followed a similar path. He had 9 carries inside the 5 over his first 5 games, just 2 carries inside the 5 over his final 8. But I mean, heading into this season, he's still in a good spot. Le'Veon Bell is gone. Darrell Williams is back. They add Jerick McKinnon, but I mean, they took this guy with a 32nd overall pick last year. They still want Edwards-Helaire to be the lead back. He's playing with Patrick Mahomes. He's playing in an Andy Reid offense that has pretty, regularly produced, top 16 PPR running backs. So I think, push comes to shove, I'm still buying Edwards-Helaire just because of the opportunity more than anything else, even though I think his rookie season was, just sort of meh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not excited about him. There are definitely some, you guys need to be drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire earlier people out there. That's not me, but I'm also not going to be out on Clyde Edwards-Helaire totally because he's well down from where he was last season. You can get him in round 3 as opposed to in round 1 as a rookie. And probably the biggest mark in his favor right now is what's behind him on the depth chart. Jerick McKinnon, they brought in. Kyle Shanahan phased Jerick McKinnon out last year, even while he was dealing with injuries to the other running backs on that roster. Darrell Williams is still around. He carried 39 times last year, which was 24 fewer than Le'Veon Bell in 7 more games with the team. It's his 3rd season with the team. I don't see why Darrell Williams would suddenly get that much more work. He had more carries and receptions per game in 2019 than he did last season did Darrell Williams. Darwin Thompson, I mean, I don't know if the Chiefs see any upside. They brought in Jerick McKinnon. They're bringing in other guys to step ahead of him on the depth chart. So I wouldn't be surprised if the number 2 back for the Chiefs this season is not yet on this roster. We've seen that the Chiefs are not scared of adding guys late in the process. LaShawn McCoy a couple years ago, Le'Veon Bell during the season last year. So I would not be shocked if they add somebody. At the moment, though, if they don't add anything else, I think it's a big win for CEH and speaks to what they expect from him this year.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I do think, Andy Reid and the Chiefs just trust Darrell Williams. I'm not even gonna say they like love the guy, but I think they just trust him. I mean, you look at the Super Bowl, and I think Edwards-Helaire was probably back to 100% by then. Edwards-Helaire out-carried Darrell Williams 9-2 in that game, but Williams saw 7 targets to Edwards-Helaire's 3. So that's kind of my slight concern is, whether they trust Edwards-Helaire totally in the passing game, whether they trust him at the goal line. Those are the 2 things we want in our running backs: targets and touchdowns. So it's something I'll be watching, this summer. We get into preseason action. There have been a few stories out of Kansas City about them wanting to get the running backs in general more involved in the passing game. So again, we'll see if that's Edwards-Helaire or if it's, some of Williams, some of Jerick McKinnon, maybe.
Yeah, I think the dynamic here is Darrell Williams maybe could be their Damian Williams versus Clyde Edwards-Helaire being their Kareem Hunt, where if Edwards-Helaire goes down, then certainly Darrell Williams can step in and get a lot of stuff. And maybe even if CEH struggles a little bit, maybe they shove a little bit more toward Darrell Williams. But I think if they really saw a high ceiling on Darrell Williams' output, they would have gotten him more involved by now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Williams signed a 1-year, $1.6 million deal, to stay with the Chiefs. So that kind of tells you they view him as a backup, and the rest of the league probably does too.
Pass catcher notes: Travis Kelce, 23% target share last year, right in line with his 2019 share. Big numbers overall. He's had 5 straight seasons as the number 1 tight end in fantasy. So, I mean, the only question really on Travis Kelce is whether you should pay the price that you now need to get that number 1 tight end. I think the mark in favor of Kelce for me, he's very unlikely to kill you unless he gets hurt. Obviously, that's a possibility for any player, but Travis Kelce is not going to crap out just from a production standpoint, the way that, maybe some of the first-round running backs could. There are guys up there who could disappoint you even if they're healthy for nearly all the season. Now, I think if you do draft Kelce in round 1 this year, you have to know that he's probably not going to match last year's scoring. Last year's points were 2.3 points per game ahead of his previous best and 4.8 PPR points per game ahead of what he posted in 2019. So there was definitely some good luck to his fantasy production last year.
Yeah, I think you're basically buying floor when you draft Kelce in the middle of round 1. I think Kelce and Tyreek Hill, the 2 top pass catchers on this team, might be the 2 safest picks in round 1. And like you said, Kelce's just been so good for a handful of years now. He does turn 32 this coming October, but there's just been no signs of decline from the guy. He actually set a career high in yards per route run last season. Hasn't missed a game due to injury since 2014. So I just think he's super safe.
Mm-hmm. Tyreek Hill, I agree, is similarly safer than you probably think when you just look at the type of player that he is. He also saw 23% target share if you include the playoffs last year. In the 5 games that Sammy Watkins missed, Tyreek Hill saw 27%. He was a little bit over 24% the year before when healthy. So that's right in the range where we should expect Hill. It's not quite the top of the league, but it is inside the top 10 among receivers perennially. PPR wise, Tyreek Hill has been top 10 at the position for 4 straight years. 2019, he missed those games, but 10th in points per game that season, 3rd in points per game without the 2 partial games, the ones where he left early in that season. So if you look at it that way, the past 3 seasons have all seen Tyreek Hill finish among the top 3 fantasy wideouts.
And he's even, last year what was safe from a weekly basis, from your wide receiver scoring review article, a league high 12 weeks as a top 24 PPR wide receiver for Tyreek Hill. So, he has the massive ceiling we saw like against that in that game against the Bucs, but he was also super safe from week to week. And, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out like who's going to emerge as the number 3 guy here with Sammy Watkins gone. I think Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce could both set, new career highs in target share this season. So, again, there are 2 guys I'm totally comfortable, kind of bucking the trend, not taking a running back round 1 and taking Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill instead.
Yeah, I agree. Sammy Watkins, we're wondering who's going to step into that spot. It doesn't really matter all that much, though. Sammy Watkins, he finished – where do I have those numbers? The Chiefs' number 2 wide receiver has only finished among the top 50 once over the past 5 years, and that was Sammy Watkins finishing 50th one of those years. So this has not been a spot that's given us good numbers overall for the season. Sammy Watkins spent about half the time in the slot, which is actually the same way that Tyreek Hill's time is broken down, half slot, half out wide. But Sammy Watkins did shorter range stuff than Tyreek Hill. He had a much shorter ADOT. The shortest ADOTs of his career, much shorter than he had at his previous 2 stops. So I wonder what that tells us about his replacement. Both Byron Pringle and Mecole Hardman split their time pretty evenly between those 2 spots and saw those shorter ADOTs similar to what Sammy Watkins saw with the Chiefs. So, both of those guys look squarely in the mix for that spot.
Yeah, and if you look at last year, it was Demarcus Robinson who benefited when Sammy Watkins missed time. In the past, at least, it seems like, the Chiefs have viewed Hardman as like the Tyreek Hill replacement and Robinson more of the Sammy Watkins. Robinson did average 5 targets and 4.2 catches per game in the 6 games Watkins missed last season. Mecole Hardman averaged just 3.2 targets in those games. Hardman is interesting to me this year, if only because he's like cheaper and people have kind of given up on him after not really taking a step forward in year 2. I still think there's a chance he has more to give us. Remember, he was very inexperienced at wide receiver coming out of Georgia. So wouldn't be surprised if it takes him a 30 year to get going. But with all these guys, Hardman, Robinson, I think Byron Pringle could be in the mix still. He actually is going to be making more money than Demarcus Robinson this season, if that means anything. So I've been taking some shots on those guys late in best ball drafts, but once we get to lineup setting leagues, as you said, these Chiefs wide receivers just haven't, behind Tyreek Hill, haven't been guys we can count on in lineup setting leagues.
Yeah, Cornell Powell might be in the mix as well, a rookie 4th rounder, but I'm going to wait until summer and see what they're saying about him at training camp rather than draft him right now. So let's jump to the who I like part. I'm good with all the big names at cost here, but I'm most interested in the guys we were just talking about, Mecole Hardman, Byron Pringle, at their later draft prices. You mentioned Mecole Hardman's going a little bit later than he was last year. Wide receiver 52 in FFPC ADP, late round 12. I like that. He was inside the top 40 at times last year. I will absolutely take him in that range. At the least, there's spike week potential. There's handcuff potential to Tyreek Hill if Tyreek Hill goes down. And then, there's just the chance that he does take the next step and gets to be a more consistent target for this top-notch offense.
Yeah, I'm actually fine with everyone at cost on the Chiefs besides Patrick Mahomes, who, is going at 3.8 right now in FFPC drafts. And I think he's the safest of the elite quarterbacks, but I think Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, and Dak Prescott all have similar upside, and you can usually get one of those guys in the 5th round. So I've actually taken Mahomes this year in the 4th. He's gotten to like the mid 4th, but in the mid 3rd, I'm not taking him there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not even reaching in round 3 to complete a Chiefs stack because I think you're giving up value in doing that. The who I don't side is any running back behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think most teams in the league, there's some level where I'll be somewhat interested in buying a second running back. Kansas City, I'm going to wait and see what happens. If the number 2 back is already on the roster, as I said, I think it's great news for CEH. And I think there's a decent chance that number 2 guy is not yet on the team.
Yeah, I've drafted Darrell Williams once or twice. Again, I just think they trust him, and I think if Edwards-Helaire does, I mean, we saw it last year. If Edwards-Helaire was hurt, and the late in the season, and even those first couple playoff games, they trusted Williams to handle 12, 13 carries per game and do stuff in the passing game. So as a handcuff, I don't think he's going to have standalone value, but as a handcuff in the 19th round, attached to this Chiefs offense, I have some interest there. Although I'm curious to see if they add anyone, or if McKinnon shows enough this summer to become a factor.
Nah, he's done. Anybody that you don't like among the Chiefs?
Just that Patrick Mahomes guy.
All right. On to the Las Vegas Raiders. Relevant coaching changes. I'm going to go ahead and say new defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley. We can get into that elsewhere, though, for the IDP folks who are playing real fantasy football. On the offensive side, there's nothing. John Gruden heads into year 4 of stint 2 with the Raiders. Greg Olson will be his OC for the 4th straight year. The team has improved its ranking in yards and points each of the past 2 years, up from 23rd in total yards in their first season to 11th and then 8th, up from 28th in scoring in that first season to 24th and then 10th last year. Their Football Outsiders DVOA was up the past 2 years as well, 25th in 2018, up to 9th, then down to 14th, but we'll take that. A DVOA in that range. So the offense has been solid to good over the past 2 years, probably more so than most people realize.
Yeah, John Gruden's not as bad of a head coach as people want to make him out to be. I remember when the Raiders made the hire, a few years ago, looking back at his history. It's been pretty solid overall. Maybe better for real life than fantasy though, because at least with the Raiders, he has leaned towards the run. Last year they were 25th in situation neutral pass rate. So, definitely a team that, has wanted to lean towards the run. I think that's going to continue this season.
Yeah, they've been about 56% pass each of the past 2 years. 57.6% pass is the average for the 3 seasons since Gruden returned. That's what I use for projections this year, just in case they are worse than they were last year before. 7-9, 8-8 the past 2 years. And I mean, looking at the team overall, I'm not sure how they got better this offseason, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do slip from those 2 records.
Yeah, I agree. I went 56%, could see him getting up to, 57, 58 if they're trailing more this season. But, you look, I think the biggest addition they made to the skill positions was Kenny and Drake, adding to the backfield with Josh Jacobs. That I think just tells me they want to continue to lean on the run.
Yeah, they should have John Gruden coach and not involved in personnel stuff is, I think, the takeaway here. QB notes, Derek Carr is probably underrated in real life. 8th in PFF passing grade each of the past 2 years. All we hear about every offseason is like, oh, who are they going to get to replace Derek Carr now? I think they're fine at quarterback, and their actions speak to that as well. 13th and 16th in fantasy points the past 2 years for Derek Carr. That seems like a good level. The thing is, it's at the level where it just doesn't really matter that much. The upside is lacking. Top 12 scoring weeks in 7 of his 16 games last year. If you want to check out the QB scoring review article, he had just 1 game of 30+, which is basically a top 5 week last week. So, I mean, that's not a high level for the position. There are plenty of quarterbacks ahead of him. So you'll get somebody who's fine and you can draft him late, but there's not a whole lot of fantasy upside to mine in Derek Carr.
Right. I mean, he's finished 18th, 16th, and 13th among quarterbacks in fantasy points the past 3 seasons. He'll probably finish higher than he's drafted this year, but that doesn't mean he's going to be more valuable than where he's picked, just because, as you said, he's not going to provide those spike weeks. Returns a similar pass catching cast this year. They lost Nelson Aguilar, add John Brown. I think the Raiders are going to hope to get more out of the 2 guys the 2 wideouts they drafted last year. I think the concern for Carr and the offense is the offensive line. After they lost Rodney Hudson and Gabe Jackson, 2 starters from last year, who both fared well in PFF pass blocking grades. Looks like they're going to be replaced by Andre James and Richie Incognito. Those, look like downgrades. They did spend a 1st-round pick on Alex Leatherwood out of Alabama. We'll see what he does. But I think the offensive line looks worse heading into this year than it was last year.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Let's jump to those pass catchers because you alluded to them a minute ago. I mean, it starts with Darren Waller, obviously. He just posted the 8th best PPR total ever for a tight end, 3.5 more points per game than he had in 2019. And his target share was up pretty significantly, 22.4% in 2019, which is already high for a tight end, up to 26.3% last year. And now, number 2 target, Nelson Aguilar, is, of course, gone to New England. So, I mean, can I say that Darren Waller is going to hit 26% again? I guess probably not, but I can't say that there's going to be a significant drop from that this year.
Yeah, that's fair. I kind of started the offseason hating on Darren Waller, how high he was going in drafts. And I kind of sat down, did projections. I feel better about it. I do think last year was like the ceiling, though. I mean, 146 targets, that led the position. It was the 11th most all time by a tight end. So again, I think that's the ceiling. He probably comes down a bit, but I also think kind of like Travis Kelce, he's a fairly safe pick just because that volume in this passing game is going to be so big.
Yeah, I would say that the argument against Darren Waller is not that he doesn't belong at tight end 2 or somewhere in the top 3, but that the top 3 tight ends have too much separation from the next few guys of the position.
Yeah, at least Waller and Kittle. I mean, I think going back to Kelce, he deserves to have separation from everyone else.
At wideout, Henry Ruggs. I mean, we could dig into whether these guys are good and what kind of fantasy upside they have, but Henry Ruggs is the highest in ADP at wide receiver 57 in FFPC drafts. John Brown, wide receiver 66. Bryan Edwards, wide receiver 79. I mean, Hunter Renfrow basically undrafted. So it's almost pointless to make arguments for or against them because all you can say is, look how late he's going. I'm going to get some Henry Ruggs in case they throw him the ball 130 times.
Yeah, I noted Henry Ruggs hater have actually drafted him a few times already this season because of the cheap price tag. Just the fact that the Raiders took this guy, what was it, 12th overall last year. I mean, they're going to work to get him going and get him to have a better second season than he was as a rookie. But they used him wrong last year. We talked about this like pre-draft. Henry Ruggs is not great going deep. He's better on the short stuff and using that speed after the catch. But 35% of his targets last year came 20-plus yards downfield. That was the 4th highest rate among 70 qualifying wide receivers. He caught just 5 of 15 targets deep. But he, when he got a chance to do stuff after the catch, he was good. 5.7 yards after the catch per reception last year. That was 15th best among qualifying wide receivers. He just didn't get enough of those chances. So, hopefully the Raiders figure it out. They, scheme up more short stuff for him because I still think he can be effective if they get him the ball there.
Yeah, so I'm in on some Henry Ruggs at what you have to pay to get him this year. I'm in on John Brown where you get him. I've backed off a little bit. I was getting more John Brown early. Now I think it's been a little bit more Bryan Edwards mixed in. But basically, there's none of these guys that I'm like, I'm taking this one every time. But every time that I get to the point where I'm taking an 8th receiver, I'm like, well, I'll take one of these Raiders. This guy could lead that position in targets.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk bad about John Brown. I love the guy. He wasn't good last year, though. Maybe it was because of all the injuries he dealt with. But that injuries have also been a problem throughout his career. He turned 31 in April, so it kind of last year might have been the beginning of the end for him. He signed just a 1-year, $3.75 million deal in free agency. That's like borderline starter money. So we'll see. Bryan Edwards is a guy I'm more excited about. He opened the season basically as a starter for the Raiders. He played 75 and 61% of the offensive snaps in Vegas' first 2 games. Then he, sprained his ankle, missed the next month, and didn't reemerge the rest of the way. But he was a prospect to be liked. I mean, his college production was about as good as it gets from a market share perspective, and he was the 81st overall pick of last year's draft. So. I think if the Raiders could have their way, it would be Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards as the top 2 receivers on this team this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I've been very interested in Bryan Edwards at his late draft price. So let's go back to the backfield where Josh Jacobs finished RB8 in total points in PPR last year, 15th in points per game, though. Tied for 13th in rate of RB1 weeks. Did so in a third of his outings on the season, 5 of 15. You can check my running back scoring review article from February for more details on that. But just to kind of put it in some context, the guys who matched him at that rate of 1/3 of their outings, Melvin Gordon, Miles Sanders, David Johnson, Jeff Wilson Jr. So you look at the overall numbers, and Josh Jacobs had a really good fantasy season. But if you break it down a little bit more, it wasn't quite that good. That said, he's now going RB21, so people are baking in that consideration. It's like all drafters have gotten smarter, so nobody's looking at it and saying, Josh Jacobs was RB8 last year, I'm drafting him as RB8 this year because I know he can do it.
Yeah, I think he's priced right about where he should be. It was kind of TD dependent last season because, he once again, kind of underwhelmed in the passing game. He was just 24th among running backs in targets, 24th in catches, 25th in receiving yards. Wasn't very efficient in the passing game. If you look at, yards per route run, PFF receiving grade, But he did score 12 rushing touchdowns. That was fourth in the league. And he tied for the league lead with 35 carries inside the 10-yard line, ranked fifth in carries inside the 5-yard line. So you can't really say the rushing touchdowns were a fluke. I think he has the upside to, score double-digit TDs again this season if, the Raiders offense doesn't take a step back, as we, sort of talked about earlier.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Raiders being more effective overall on offense the past 2 years than most people probably realize. Of course, another big factor in why people aren't excited about Josh Jacobs right now is that Kenyon Drake joined the team, got $11 million on a 2-year deal in free agency. That's pretty big money for a running back switching teams, a veteran running back, but his annual average ranks a more modest 13th at the position this season. It's behind Tariq Cohen. It's behind Kareem Hunt. It's just $1 million more than Gus Edwards, just $2 million more than Jalen Richard, who, of course, is a new teammate. The Raiders could have cut Jalen Richard by now. They have not. We'll see if that happens at some point this summer. But, I think that's just a little bit of context. It's not that there was this huge market. I don't know for sure, but I don't think that there was this huge market for Kenyon Drake and the Raiders swooped in to pay what they needed to get him. I think they were bidding against themselves for a player that they wanted to add.
Yeah, I could see that. Drake wasn't very good last year. If you look at, elusive rating, he was 44th among 47 qualifying running backs. He was 39th in PFF rushing grade. He was near the bottom of running backs in yards per route run and PFF receiving grade. He dealt with injuries. He had that foot injury in late August where he was in a boot and we weren't sure what it was. He hurt his ankle in October. So, maybe he just, wasn't healthy for most of the season. But, if you look at all the, stuff Gruden has said about Kenyon Drake, it sounds like they want to use him more in the passing game. I think, as crazy as it might sound based on what they paid him, I think they might just see him as an upgrade over Jalen Richard. So, I still think Jacobs is going to handle the majority, as long as he's healthy, the majority of the rushing work here. I think Jacobs' receiving role is going to remain frustrating, and that, again, Drake might just be a souped up version of Richard. Maybe he sees a bit more work on the ground, but I'm not sure it's going to be a true committee backfield, at least on early downs.
Yeah, I think Drake is probably viewed as an upgrade on the combo of Devontae Booker and Jalen Richard, which I think adds a little bit more value to his position than maybe Devontae Booker would have provided last year. Booker leaves behind, by the way, 21% carry share, 4% of the targets. So we could immediately give those numbers to Drake, I think. And there's room for him to siphon a bit from Jacobs without crushing Jacobs' fantasy value, siphon a bit from Jalen Richard. Again, we'll see if maybe Jalen Richard doesn't even wind up on the active roster because they can cut him without any cap penalty, at least according to what Spot Track has. Right after they signed Kenyon Drake, it wasn't like, we need to have him here to share stuff with Josh Jacobs so that there's less on his plate. It was, here's a player that we can use in lots of different ways. Gruden even mentioned the return game. So They clearly view Kenyon Drake as an athlete that they can deploy in various ways rather than somebody who's taking work away from Jacobs. And Josh Jacobs, even though he missed a game last season, ranked 5th at the position in carry share. So he could lose some of that carry share to Kenyon Drake and still be in good shape relative to other running backs and relative to where he's going in drafts right now, which again is RB21.
Yeah, there are a couple of quotes from Gruden in the Jacobs and Drake profiles on our site if you want to check them out. But yeah, I mean, he basically he mentioned kind of like an insurance thing, like Drake's some insurance for Jacobs, and he also mentioned wanting to get Drake involved in the passing game.
Jared, who do you like among Raiders in drafts right now?
Yeah, I have no hot takes on this team. I think the wide receivers, I think Henry Ruggs, wide receiver 57, John Brown, wide receiver 66, Brian Edwards, wide receiver 80. They're all fine where they're going. I think you can take, some shares of them. I think Darren Waller is fine if you can get him in the 3rd round of standard leagues. I think he's fine in the 2nd round in FFPC. I think Derek Carr, not exciting. I think the running backs are kind of fairly priced. Jacobs at RB21, Drake at RB41. So it's not a team I've been drafting a ton of, but I also don't think anyone's overvalued because no one's excited about this Raiders offense.
Yeah, nobody I'm in hot pursuit of, but those wideouts late are what interests me the most. Ruggs, Brown, Edwards. And I mean, it's even easier to like them after seeing what Nelson Aguilar did with the Raiders last season. He was coming off a crappy finish in Philly where we all thought, oh, Nelson Aguilar is done. He got a 1-year deal with the Raiders. He's about to disappear. No, he became a top 36 receiver and got a big contract from the Patriots. So, I mean, from that scope, it's not hard to envision Henry Ruggs turning in something useful for fantasy owners or somebody else if it's not Henry Ruggs. Kenyon Drake doesn't do much for me. I won't tell you he's a terrible pick at RB41 because there's no such thing as a terrible pick at that range. But Jamal Williams is right behind him. Naheem Hines is behind him. Darrell Henderson's behind him. And then right in front of Kenyon Drake are David Johnson, Gus Edwards. I mean, all those guys for best ball interest me more than Drake. And then Drake's role doesn't do a whole lot for me for a lineup setting format. I think we're going to need a Josh Jacobs injury to make him startable when we're setting our lineups.
Yes, agreed. I think in lineup setting, you kind of value Drake as a handcuff to Jacobs. I don't think he's going to have a big enough role where feel good about putting him in your lineup setting leagues. I think in best ball, there's a chance he has some 4 or 5, 6 catch games where he gets in there. So again, I think he's okay at RB41. I do prefer Jamal Williams, as you mentioned. Darrell Henderson are 2 guys I would rather have than Kenyon Drake.
Anybody else on the who I don't front?
Nope.
Well, let's go to the Chargers then to wrap it up. And Jared, hit me with any relevant coaching changes here.
Yeah, brand new staff here. Brandon Staley coming in as head coach. He's a defensive minded guy. He went from linebackers coach with the Bears and Broncos to Rams defensive coordinator last year. Now he's the Chargers head coach at just 38 years old. So, maybe the next, new wonder kid head coach. But it's going to be Joe Lombardi running the offense. And he spent most of his time in the NFL with the Saints under Sean Payton. He's had 2 different stints in New Orleans, including the past 5 as quarterbacks coach. In between those 2 stints, he did spend 2 years as the Lions OC in 2014 and 2015. Those offenses weren't great. Both ranked in the bottom half of the league in total yards and total points. The run games were horrible. They were led by guys like Amir Abdullah, Joique Bell, Reggie Bush. So maybe the personnel had something to do with that. But both teams did finish top 12 in passing yards. And, under Matt Stafford. Stafford topped 4,200 yards in both those years. He tossed 54 total touchdowns across those 2 seasons. I think the interesting thing here about those 2 years with the Lions, they finished 7th and 1st in pass rate those 2 seasons. And they were also 5th in situation neutral pace in both of those years. So it was a fast paced offense. And it was a pass heavy offense. The pass heavy thing probably had something to do with the fact that the running game was so bad. But I still think I'm still kind of expecting this to be a fast paced and pass leaning offense this season.
I'm trying not to set any expectations here because I don't think that we know much of Joe Lombardi yet. He had just the 2 seasons as OC, as you mentioned, in Detroit. Spent the past 5 in New Orleans as a QB's coach. I mean, I think we can assume that he got some good tutelage there under Sean Payton. I'm also going to assume that it wasn't Joe Lombardi's offense as opposed to Sean Payton's offense. So, again, I'm just not considering a net positive or negative. I'm not really letting it impact my expectations on any of the players for the Chargers.
Yep, that's fair. One other note I wanted to make about the Chargers. They ran 1,127 plays last season. That led the league. It was the most over the past 2 seasons. It was the second most over the past 5 seasons. So I even if they're fast paced this season, I think you're going to get fewer plays from the Chargers, maybe significantly fewer plays. That's something to keep in mind. We'll talk about. I like this offense. I'm investing in it, but that's I think a downside here is just decreased play volume.
Mm-hmm. Did you give your run pass split for the Chargers?
I didn't, but I went 61% pass, which is high. Again, based on Lombardi's time with the Lions, just based on the personnel here, with a good young quarterback, a nice group of pass catchers, a lead running back who is, best in the passing game. So I think it would make sense for them to, be one of the pass heavier teams.
Yeah, I don't think that we know what to expect from him yet. I just went with the average from the past 7 offenses that he's been in, those 2 in Detroit, the 5 in New Orleans, 59-41. So it's a very similar range. I think it's a fair range for expectations here. The 5 Saints offenses that Lombardi was in recently, 57-43 pass run. So, we'll see, but that's the starting point at least. QB notes, Justin Herbert was awesome as a rookie. I mean, if you're trying, you could find some numbers that made him look a bit more average than people think, more average than the fantasy production made him look, but it was a rookie quarterback. He did more than anybody expected. I'm going to continue betting on Herbert going forward. The problem from a fantasy standpoint is that so is everyone else now. He's QB 6 in FFPC ADP.
Yeah, he's, I think Herbert and really most guys on this Chargers team are priced fairly. You're not going to get discounts when drafting Chargers. It doesn't mean I don't like them, but they're not coming at his values. But yeah, Herbert, the second most fantasy points by a rookie quarterback in NFL history, behind only Cam Newton, right ahead of Robert Griffin, Dak Prescott, and Kyler Murray. He benefited from a couple things. Herbert did. Pass volume, 595 pass attempts. That was fourth most in the NFL, despite him not even playing week one. I think that goes back to the fact that the Chargers just ran so many plays last season. He was also seventh among quarterbacks in rushing touchdowns, despite being outside the top 10 in both carries and rushing yards. So the rush touchdowns probably regress a bit in 2021, although it is worth noting that he ranked fourth among quarterbacks with 7 carries inside the 5-yard line. So at least the old coaching staff was using him, as a runner near the goal line. We'll see if Joe Lombardi does the same thing.
And, maybe a weak backfield just gives him more opportunities in that facet. Plus, even if you lose some of the rushing touchdowns, his passing touchdown rate was 5.2% last year. So that's an easily repeatable number. Apparently not easy to say. And also a number that he could come up on to make up for some of that.
Yep, and we'll get into the other guys here, but Herbert dealt with a bunch of injuries to his pass catchers last season. Keenan Allen missed 2 games, was limited for 2 others. Mike Williams missed 1 game, was limited in 3, and Austin Eckler missed 6 games and was limited in 1. So there's upside for the pass catching core should be healthier this season, which can only help Herbert.
The biggest risk maybe, and something that I didn't look into before the show, is maybe if he gets a chest injury and they have the same team doctor that treated Tyrod Taylor last year. I mean, if we get a lung puncture to treat any injury issue here, maybe that could knock Herbert out.
Yeah, stay away from the needles, Justin.
Running back notes, Austin Eckler lost basically 7 games last year to a week 4 hamstring tear. In his healthy games, 17.9% target share. That would have ranked 3rd behind Alvin Kamara and J.D. McKissick among running backs for the season. Even his carry share, 44.7%, obviously a bit on the low side for a lead back, but that would have ranked 12th at the position for the season. So we're not talking about, Chase Edmonds on steroids here. Austin Eckler is a guy who gets the ball a good bit in both phases.
Yeah, 13.4 carries in those healthy games last season as an average. Averaged 7.1 targets. So, I mean, that's fantasy gold, especially in PPR. To be getting 13 or 14 carries plus 7 targets per game. I mean, Eckler has been for the past 2 years now, one of, if not the most effective pass catching back in the league. He actually led all qualifying running backs in yards per route run back in 2019. He was 5th in that category last year. And now you get Joe Lombardi, who, just spent the past, few seasons with Alvin Kamara. And, I think some of us fantasy people sort of made that connection back when they hired Lombardi. And then James Palmer of NFL Network had a report about a month ago, basically saying that, Lombardi envisions using Eckler similarly to how the Saints did with Alvin Kamara. And, Kamara has caught, 80 plus balls the past 3 years. So I definitely think that is within the range of outcomes for Eckler.
Yeah, and I don't see why he couldn't perform similarly. I mean, Alvin Kamara is obviously a very good player, but he was also a 3rd-round pick entering the league. He's not a 4.3 40 guy. So he's been excellent, not an otherworldly kind of generational player. So Austin Eckler, his price has risen. He's around the 1-2 turn at this point, but he belongs there, it seems like.
He does. I think so. Should be running behind a better O-line, too. The Chargers signed center Corey Linsley in free agency. They drafted Rashawn Slater in the 1st round of the draft. So, it's been kind of a shaky O-line in years past, but I think it has the potential to be, at least an average unit this season.
What's shaky with the Chargers this season for sure is the depth chart behind Austin Eckler in the backfield or joining him, however you want to look at it. Joshua Kelly disappointed big time as a rookie. The Chargers are clearly disappointed. He gets a restart with a new coaching staff, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go better. Justin Jackson hasn't been able to stay healthy, and yet the only significant addition this offseason was Larry Roundtree in round 6, and we'll see how significant that actually is. It's round 6. So new coaching staff, we'll see what they think of all these players, but I think what else is around Austin Eckler in that backfield can only help his available opportunities.
Right. I think who the number 2 back is, I'm not sure it matters from a fantasy perspective, outside of an Eckler injury, because, in Eckler's healthy games last season, the other Chargers running backs combined to average just 8 carries and 3.1 targets per game. That's not enough to be someone you can, throw into a weekly fantasy lineup. So I'm not sure who it's going to be. As you said, Kelly was horrible last year. Jackson hasn't been able to stay healthy. Roundtree's just, not an exciting guy. Maybe they add someone else, and we'll see what the usage looks like under the new coaching staff. But again, if it's like it was last season, the number 2 back is not going to be a fantasy factor.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seemed early, like the very start of the year, it seemed like Joshua Kelly was headed for more work. Like they wanted to give him more stuff. So, the new coaching staff changes everything. We'll have to see how it goes. But there's nothing scary to an Austin Eckler owner behind Eckler in that backfield. The pass catcher notes, Keenan Allen, this is obviously another top-heavy depth chart. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams are there, and Keenan Allen, a much bigger slice of the pie, but we'll get to both of them for sure. 28.6% target share in 12 healthy games for Keenan Allen last year, 11 healthy outings with Justin Herbert. He fell short of 10 targets in just one of those games. Keenan Allen did have the shortest average depth of target for his career, but, if you're catching 8-9 balls every game, it doesn't really matter how far downfield you are.
Yeah, 29% target share in those 11 healthy games with Justin Herbert. And now, the Chargers lose Hunter Henry, who was second on the team last year with 93 targets. They added Jared Cook at tight end. Eckler is going to be healthier this season, hopefully. But, Allen is a candidate to lead the league in targets this season if he stays healthy.
Mm-hmm. Mike Williams, 12 end zone targets last year, tied for 13th in the league according to Pro Football Focus, but caught only 2 of them. That tied for 70th. 31 players had 10-plus end zone targets last season. Williams was one of just 4 who failed to score at least 3 times. So the upside on Mike Williams is pretty obvious, I think.
Yeah, he's been like the poster boy of TD volatility since entering the league. He's had some double-digit touchdown seasons. Some seasons with just a couple scores. But basically he's scored as like a lower-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game if you just look at it over the past 3 seasons now. So I think, that's kind of the floor here. And if the offense takes a step forward, I think, Williams could finish even higher. We've had Joe Lombardi talking up Mike Williams, as the X receiver, the position Michael Thomas has played for the Saints. And, Mike Williams is not going to come close to Michael Thomas's level of production, but it does seem like his role could even grow a bit in Joe Lombardi's offense.
He's a perfect wide receiver 5 or 6 in a best ball lineup because he can score 2 touchdowns in any given week.
I'm okay with Williams as like my wide receiver 4.
Mm-hmm. Beyond those guys, we'll see how the roles get sorted out. Tyron Johnson, ESPN recently had a post where they provided a surprise player from each team from many camps. They had the beat writer for that team pick out one surprise guy. Tyron Johnson was the pick for the Chargers. Shelley Smith said coaches talked him up all the time, talked him up big time. So it was Tyron Johnson playing behind Jalen Guyton last year, but Tyron Johnson was seeing his first action. It was his second year as an undrafted free agent, but he saw no playing time as an actual rookie his first year in the league. Saw his role grow over the final quarter of last season when Keenan Allen was out. He broke out as a 22-year-old in his final college season, so not the kind of prospect that we get excited about. He's already 25, but did have production that season, was the number 2 wide receiver on that Oklahoma State team behind Tylan Wallace at that point. And now it's him against Jalen Guyton and Josh Palmer. There's some excitement about Josh Palmer, the rookie, of course, who came in round 3 this year, but it wouldn't be shocking if Josh Palmer takes a little bit of time to develop and Tyron Johnson is that guy opposite Mike Williams this year.
Yeah, and Jalen Guyton, if you look at like almost any efficiency metric, was like near the bottom of the league. So to me, he's like the third guy among these 3. I think, it's going to be either Tyron Johnson or Josh Palmer as the third target, third wide receiver in this passing game. Kind of like with the other running backs, though, I don't think it's going to matter in at least lineup setting leagues. If you look at the 10 games that Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were both at full strength last season, Tyron Johnson and Jalen Guyton combined for 41 targets in those 10 games, a full season pace of 66 targets. That's just not enough for lineup setting leagues. I do think, Tyron Johnson and Josh Palmer are fine shots to take late in best ball. If we expect this to be a top 5 offense, I think there's room for one or both of those guys to have a few spiked weeks.
And I would say take one of those guys if you have Justin Herbert as one of your quarterbacks. Otherwise, there's probably somebody with more upside than either of those guys at the same spot.
That is a good point. I think stacking with your late wide receiver is just as, if not more beneficial than stacking with the early round guys.
Mm-hmm. Tight end Jared Cook arrived in free agency. Donald Parham is a dude, and then they drafted Trey McKitty from Georgia in round 3. I think you could pick out any one of them and find some positives. I think the fact that all of them are there leaves me not very interested in the position on whole.
Yeah, it sounds like they view McKitty as more of a blocker, at least for now. Donald Parham has like fans in the fantasy community. I'm not sure that the Chargers like him as much as, fantasy people do. Jared Cook got, a 1 year fully guaranteed $4.5 million deal. So, decent money. He is reuniting with Joe Lombardi, who, they spent the past 2 years together in New Orleans. So he should be pretty familiar with the offense. And Cook, despite turning 34 in April, he was still effective last season. 11th in yards per route run among 34 qualifying tight ends, 14th in PFF receiving grades. So I think Cook is the favorite to lead, this group in targets. And, he's going cheap enough in drafts. He's tight end 22 in FFPC ADP. Again, just because I like this Chargers offense, I think Cook makes some sense at that price.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with taking Cook where he's going. He just doesn't stand out for upside versus other guys in that range. There are lots of tight ends that you can make a case for down there. Donald Parham will be interesting. I want to see what they say about him in the summer. Again, it's a new coaching staff, so we don't really know. He's big, really big, 6'8", I think it is, athletic, and he put up enormous receiving numbers at the end of college. It was D3, I believe. So that might explain it. But, it's not hard to look at all that and think something about Donald Parham as a late tight end. But, we'll see. Again, I'm not overly excited about any of those guys. Who I like, I would say Mike Williams is my favorite Charger at cost for best ball season. He will still certainly be in play when I get to teams where I'm setting the lineups every week. But I do think that when we transition more to those drafts, Keenan Allen gets even prettier when I'm looking at a team where I have to set the lineup every week, because I will absolutely never take him out as long as he's healthy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Mike Williams is probably the best value here. Wide receiver 48 in FFPC ADP. I think, I'd bet on him finishing 10 plus spots higher than that. I think Keenan Allen, he's going in like the mid third round in most drafts. I think he's just fair there. Like if I have a mid third round pick, I'm definitely considering Keenan Allen. And same goes for Austin Eckler. He's going, at the tail end of round one. I think that's where he should be going. I think he could even go a few spots higher. I think he sits a couple spots higher than that in our rankings. So Eckler is another guy I've drafted plenty of.
Anybody that you don't like among these Chargers?
I have Justin Herbert here, and it's kind of the same argument as I had for Patrick Mahomes. It's just the price tag. Quarterback 6th, going at 604 in FFPC best balls. I can get Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott around earlier. I can get Russell Wilson, who I actually prefer straight up to Justin Herbert, although it's super close. But I can get Wilson like around later. So I don't like the value on Herbert compared to those other guys.
Yeah, same here. I'm betting on Herbert as the player, but he's less than a round behind Dak Prescott, just in front of Russell Wilson. As you said, I prefer Wilson straight up. I'm not saying it's definitely Russell Wilson over just Justin Herbert at the end of this year, but if I'm picking between them, it's Wilson more often. And I can also wait for Jalen Hurts, Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, and Ryan Tannehill stands out as a comparison for me here. I mean, does Herbert really beat Ryan Tannehill in ceiling? I mean, we got most of 2 seasons now where Ryan Tannehill has been a top 8 fantasy quarterback for Tennessee. He's showed us the ceiling that we want to get from our quarterback, especially. And now he's swapped out Corey Davis for Julio Jones. And we're still looking at, even though Tannehill has climbed in ADP since then, he's still 2.5 rounds behind Justin Herbert. So I don't think there's 2.5 rounds of difference in the fantasy profiles of Ryan Tannehill and Justin Herbert.
Yeah, I'm still recalibrating my Ryan Tannehill thoughts, post Julio Jones trade, because I was all out on him pre-Julio. Definitely, obviously more in on him now. I do, not to get too much into Tannehill, but I do still think Arthur Smith's departure is going to hurt that offense.
I think it'll hurt, but we also might see more passing than we're used to with them. And if it's a worse offense, maybe we'll see a little bit more Ryan Tannehill scrambling. But we also know, the one thing we know for sure is that because you're a Dolphins fan, we cannot trust your opinion of Ryan Tannehill at all.
No. I like Tannehill. I was just, I was being objective with the take pre Julio trade, but yeah, we'll save that for the AFC South preview.
That's right. That's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com now. You can see exactly where we project all of these players that we discussed today and dive into our meaty profiles for each guy. Subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel. You can prepare for upcoming episodes of this divisional preview series and find other stuff along the way as well. Find us on Twitter. We are at Draft Sharks. Jared is at Smola DS. I am at Schauf DS. It's SCHAUF. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.